Hey everyone, Barryz here. So this is going to be the first proper Lore for Cybertron video where I'll be going in depth into the lore of how Megatron got his iconic cannon and what its significance is, not just to himself, but also to the Decepticon cause. There's a lot of hidden subtext involving Autobot corruption, early Decepticon rebellions, and even a proper reason why Megatron chose his iconic fusion cannon. So let's get started. The War for Cybertron didn't suddenly start as many people believe, but rather it was likely a slow burn of protests and riots against a blatantly corrupt group of primes, which eventually gave way to the Decepticons being labeled a terrorist organization. With increasingly violent demonstrations, it is likely that the Autobot guards used what is known as a Riot Cannon, featured in Fall of Cybertron, to counter these demonstrations once the Decepticons were labeled terrorists. Riot cannons are modified fusion cannons, likely modified to be less lethal, although that modification can be debated. In fact, that is likely the reason why the protests grew into a civil war, with the Decepticons facing lethal consequences for attempting a peaceful path. The corruption of the Primes is not well detailed, unfortunately. However, the mismanagement of resources and caste system tells us more than we need to know about what the Decepticons were fighting for, originally at least. However, once the Autobots retaliated with lethal weapons, such as riot cannons, the Decepticons quickly begun to forge their own armaments, and the Civil War promptly began. It is likely that Megatron chose the riot cannon as a symbol, turning the very weapon that had been used to oppress his Decepticons for so long into a weapon of uprising. A weapon that he would wield to lead the charge in this war. However, the riot cannon would prove to not be as effective in creating carnage in a war zone, so Megatron would get to work changing that. He would take the riot cannon and use its base design as his own fusion cannon. However, his was a one-of-a-kind custom. Whether it was modified by Shockwave or even potentially just by himself, Megatron forged a recognizable cannon, which would be known to all Decepticons for its savage power. You can actually see this modification in-game, as the fusion cannon Megatron wields in the campaign is different from the one featured in multiplayer, with the campaign cannon dealing extra damage compared to its multiplayer counterpart. Megatron managed to take the very weapon that the Decepticons had known to oppress them and murder them for years, and managed to make it into a weapon used to rally them against their oppressors. To put this into perspective, every time the Decepticons saw a riot cannon, they knew that they were potentially going to die. And then seeing Megatron, their own leader, using one to strike back against the Autobots, must have motivated them while also furthering his own image and legend. The Decepticons revered Megatron and his cannon as their great liberator with a trusty cannon at his side to protect them against the corrupt system that placed little value on their lives. If Megatron's iconic fusion cannon is so important to not only himself but the other Decepticons, then why did he go back to using a riot cannon after his revival in Fall of Cybertron? Well, it's rather simple. Megatron's fusion cannon was one of a kind, and when he was turned into Play-Doh, that cannon was destroyed. And it was difficult enough to find the parts to rebuild Megatron, let alone his custom fusion cannon that Soundwave likely didn't even know how to recreate. Interestingly enough, however, the Fall of Cybertron trailers showcased Megatron's new design with his iconic fusion cannon. This is likely due to the riot cannon not having a final design when those trailers were made. Soundwave, however, knew the importance of the fusion cannon, so he scrounged up an old riot cannon for Megatron to use within the arena to challenge Starscream's title. This is actually an incredibly tactical decision made by Soundwave, as without a fusion cannon, the Decepticons would have likely been a lot more hesitant to follow Megatron without his iconic cannon. You see, Megatron's own image probably got to his head a lot within War for Cybertron, and you can actually see it a lot in-game where Megatron is sacrificing his own troops with little regard to their lives. The Decepticons likely at first saw Megatron as this great protector, this great liberator that they would trust with their lives. But as time went on into the Civil War, Megatron seemed to be a lot more selfish. He seemed to believe in his own hype a lot more, and thus he let his own Decepticons' lives go to the wayside. The Decepticons used to be an honorable faction fighting for the rights of individuals. However, as time went on, Megatron eventually gradually turned the entire Decepticon ideology into simply furthering his own ideals, his own legend. Megatron's cannon is an iconic element to his character, the silhouette of the imposing blaster almost overshadowing the Big Con himself. The story of Megatron's cannon being told in the background of the Cybertron games is a perfect showcase of exactly how detailed the lore is within these games, and it's why I chose it to be my first proper Lore for Cybertron video. There's so much more like this involving characters, weapons, locations, history, and vehicles, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to rely on this series for content whenever we're in a reactivate drought. My next video will be the Q&A video, so sorry, don't worry, that video is coming out soon. But if you liked this video, make sure to like it and even leave a question in the comments for my next Q&A video. Till all are one.